Dan Connors, welcome to Tech Talk with Daniel.
Hi, Daniel. Great to see you.
You know, your transition from a QA tester to a CEO represents the epitome of the American dream. And I couldn't be more delighted to have you here with me for a conversation today.
Well, it was quite a ride, so I'm happy to talk about it and go down memory lane.
Now, I'd like to kick things off by exploring the early stages of your career. So how did you get started in the QA field, and what led you to become a QA tester?
Back, this was in the early 90s, and I'd been in California for probably about a year or so. And, I came to California I left Massachusetts to come to California, and I was very interested in entertainment, maybe more in like movies or Hollywood. I'd studied communications in college. But I got out here and there weren't a lot of jobs around. So I was working whatever I could do. I was, on a bottling beer, getting petitions signed, bussing tables, room service, whatever to pay the rent. I had just taken a CBEST test to become a substitute teacher. And I was trying to get a job down at KLX, which was in Berkeley at the radio station. And I was coaching a little lacrosse. And all of a sudden, my friend, Mike Levine, also known as Lebo, had told me he was working at LucasArts. And he had found the job as a tester in the paper. He was just looking through, and my friend was with him at the time. And all of a sudden he screams from the other room, "This is it!" And Mike wanted the job, and he went in and he got it. And they were moving him up to be an art tech on Sam and Max. So he was leaving the test pit. And he said, "Hey, do you want to come in and test?" I said, "Well, I don't. I'm a gamer. I've played games my whole life growing up, but there were, ColecoVision, Atari, Intellivision, Pole Position, Punch Out, the arcade, all that stuff. So I definitely knew about games like everyone from my generation, but I really hadn't played any PC games. So me and Mike sat down and played some of indie, very little of it, so I could try to see what a PC game was, but I really went in not knowing. But luckily Mike talked to Wayne Klein and Mark Cartwright and said, "Hey, you should give Dan a chance. He can figure this out." And I had been working with Mike, editing video because he was trying to get in at the marketing department, or trying to create a role at the marketing department because it didn't exist, doing videos. So he had made some of the early videos, and I had worked on those with him. So I had a little bit of a leg up, and they got in and put me into QA. And it turns out that my lack of awareness of what being a PC gamer was my biggest strength. Because I just needed to really just sit down and hit the keyboard and just start typing, and the bugs would just flow. I was basically like a mayhem machine. But the one skill I had was that once I realized that people wanted me to break it, all I needed to do was keep track of what I did. So I just became really maniacal about breaking the games. So it led to a lot of colorful banter between me and the programmers and the designers, and it was a good way to focus and learn about it. So yeah, that's kind of how I got in back at the beginning.
And when was that exactly?
Well, it was Day of the Tentacle I started on. I know it was right around Easter, and I think we had this conversation before. Is it 92 or 93? And someone else was asking me this. I was working as a busboy to make money, and then I got the job, and I'd worked that week at Lucas, and then it was Easter Saturday and Sunday of Easter, and they needed me to come in and test Paul Park Ranger, so that could ship.
So Day of the Tentacle came out in June 1993. So
yeah, so it would have been March. I think it was March. So I was right there, like I was testing the floppies, and then I remember the CDs coming in like within a month or so. But yeah, I definitely cut my teeth testing the Day of the Tentacle floppies. And that was a blast. That game was so great and so funny, and just, you know, we would it was awesome because in the test pit, you know, we'd be playing and we kind of get into a trance, and people read the voice. You know, you do whatever, you're playing a game, you're reading the lines off in your own head. So we all had our own voices for the characters. So when the actual voices came in, it was like a shock to everyone's system. But you know, it's a big leap forward in games in general at that point, you know, having a talkie.
Now, typically when developers and artists get credited on a game on different platforms, it doesn't necessarily mean that they worked on all of these versions. Instead, it implies that their code and artwork were utilized cross-platform. But if I understand correctly, in your case, being credited for both the PC and Mac versions of a game signifies that you've indeed tested both iterations?
Yeah, but if you're credited on the PC game, that's kind of the lead SKU. So you're kind of you become responsible for, well, you're either a tester on it and you actually put in testing time. So if I sat on the Mac and played it on the Mac a couple times, I would get a testing credit on the Mac. But most of my work would have been on the PC, and Dana Fong was doing all the Mac products, Apple products at the time. So, you know, you would have a lead on the PC, who I think was Captain Trips, Joe Ashburn, who also wrote all the hint guides, and then you would work writing up bugs for that. And then when it was ready to go over to the Mac, you test the Mac. But the PC testing cycle was like, you know, probably 8 or 9 months, whereas the Mac testing cycle was probably a month, because it was a done game getting ported over to a new platform. The PC was definitely the lead SKU back in the day, for sure, and still is. I mean, and
now, even though you're not credited on Monkey Island 2, I understand that you've tested the FM Towns version. Am I right?
You are right. I did test the FM Towns version, and I may be credited on the FM Towns version. Like, if you know anybody that has that.
I'm looking for the information on Moby Games, and you're not credited on Monkey Island 2 at all. So
yeah. Well, Monkey Island 2 was done by the time I got there, but the FM Towns did come back through, and it was me and a couple other people. I mean, it was kind of it wasn't a huge project because, you know, it wasn't a lead SKU at the time. I think we were all working on, I don't know if it was a Sam & Max at the time or maybe Full Throttle.
Now, around a year ago, someone on Twitter discovered that in the FM Towns version of Monkey Island 2, they completely took out the part where Guybrush uses the fishing pole to get the map piece from the cliff. From my previous conversations with ex-LucasArts staff, it appears that the challenge lay in implementing vertical scrolling in animated scenes on the FM Towns, which for some reason they struggled to achieve. Now, did you as a tester on this version receive prior knowledge about this issue as well as its solution, or did you discover it on your own and perceive it as a bug?
It was definitely perceived as a bug because you needed it to move forward. So it would have been a blocker, and there was no workaround. So we would have I think Tess would have reported as like, I'm stuck here at first. And then someone that played the game before that had played Monkey 2 or tested Monkey 2 said, well, of course you're stuck. You can't get you can't use the fishing pole to get it's a document you need to pull up with the fishing pole. And if you can't move forward without it, so it will be a blocker. And then, you know, then we would have the conversation with the programmers. Like, they would say, well, what if we just skipped past it? And would have the back and forth of, well, what would that mean quality wise? How big of an audience would it affect? You know, can we do that? Can we not? You know, no one was glib about it. It wasn't like, no, just take it. We need to just take it out. I think everyone was like, we have to be real. You know, if we're not going to make this happen, any other workarounds seem wrong. Let's just skip the puzzle.
My question is if it's something that came from the testers or the developers knew in advance that there may be an issue with that part.
They didn't tell us, from what I can remember. But it was a long time ago. I wouldn't be surprised if they were like, well, let's see what the testers do or say, or, it's more like, hey, we've got this much of the game. I think from a programming perspective, and, you might know better than me, but from a programming perspective, it's like, let's get as much working as we can, So if you're down to one issue that what it is, it's almost like you don't even think about it, right? Because it's there. You need to unearth all the other stuff. So they're getting whatever product they're getting us to test, it's as much working as can work.
Developers usually hope that the QA testers won't notice, and hopefully the game will ship either way.
Right. Well, if it's a blocker where, there's no functionality to actually execute the puzzle, at that point, it's kind of just like either you're not thinking about it, or you think it's going to be funny when they actually come across it and send an A bug to you, like, oh my God, the whole thing is broken. We're going to, can't ship it. We're going to die, quick production to solve the problem, but Eric's such a pro. He had been through it a bunch. Judith Lucero was such a pro. I think they probably knew and they already figured they would start running solutions by us once we understood the problem, right? There's a reason to let us look at it and get our brains around what it really means before we talk about how we should solve it. But that one's so obvious. I doubt it was that. I doubt it was that like big of a thing. I think it's just we have to solve it.
2 months ago marked the 30th anniversary of Day of the Tentacle, which also signifies the fact that it's been over 30 years since you joined LucasArts. So congrats on that.
Yes, thank you for that. My gray hairs hear you.
Day of the Tentacle was the first Scum game in which both the floppy and the CD talkie version were launched on the same day. Like you said, you were involved in testing the floppy version and the CD-ROM version, right?
Yes, definitely.
Did you come across any bugs specifically related to the CD version or to the floppy version?
Well, I think most of the logic was cleaned up in the floppy version. Like if it was a logic bug, you go back and you kind of work on it on the floppy stuff because there's fewer issues around. There's fewer issues around like unknowns and new variables, right? But everything on the CD, there was a ton of new variables on the CD, from load times and access to voice lines and triggering voice lines and whether there's a whole sanity check on was the voice line recorded correctly? Is the tone of the voice line correct? Does the read work? Almost a qualitative like. Obviously, Bernard doesn't understand. The guy that's acting as Bernard doesn't understand the situation when he read this line that he's talking to a mummy that's now been painted red or whatever. It was a lot of like out of context type of stuff. So it was learning how to voice record for a game and in the types of things that come up and the type of communication that needs to be done between a director, a game designer, and a voice actor in the studio to get a performance that's going to stick. Now, Tamlin was a real pro. So, she was on it no matter what it was. It was a really quick turnaround time. I mean, I think it was one of those things where you dropped it in and the things on the CD, you dropped it in and the things that were going to be problems immediately made themselves clear. Whether it was the processor speed versus the speed of the CD-ROM drive and just voices skipping in huge gaps where if you spam the space bar, the game crashes, that type of thing. It's pretty obvious, like there's a big hole here. So, okay, how do we address that? Well, we work on what the minimum spec is and we try to get that communicated out correctly. And then lines read out of context and misleading reads and all that kind of stuff, just kind of the first pass makes it really clear. And then it's like, okay, how quickly can we address all of that, get a bulk of content back in, see how far we've pushed it forward, and now start pruning. But I do think it was like the code was stable, the logic was stable, so you knew it wasn't breaking because you did something that was like, weird or wrong or something the code hadn't accounted for. You knew that was tight, so you could focus on the other things about, okay, how do we get the quality of the voice recording and the quality of the user experience right?
And did you also manage to check the lip syncing to see if it works correctly in the game, in the intro?
Yeah, that was another element of how did we do with that? How close are we? And I tend to think the style was such that it was exaggerated enough that we gave ourselves a lot of leeway for reads. But yeah, you never wanted to have, there were certainly plenty of bugs where the character's mouth would move, there'd be no voice, and then the voice would trigger after the character finished. So that wasn't an artistic issue. It was a programmatic issue. But and then there were sometimes where the art needed to go in and rework some of the different, I guess, phonemes. I don't know if we called them phonemes back then, but they would, rework the different mouth shapes and things like that. So yeah, it was all new, right? So it was like anything that we couldn't have like planned perfectly needed to get a QA pass. So all that stuff came out.
But were there actual lines that had to be re-recorded because of feedback from you guys?
I can't remember any specifics. One thing I do remember is I could not. Denny Delk did Hoagie, and I think Denny Delk did Hoagie.
Yep.
And he was older, right? And we were all like, we were kids, 21, 22, 24, maybe I was. So we had a real image of Hoagie, that surfer dude. We all had a voice, like I was saying earlier, we all had a voice for Hoagie. Like Hoagie's voice was, yeah, dudes, everyone in the test pit said the same thing. So when Denny Dell came in and gave his professional performance on it and just kind of made it a little deeper and a little older and a little less surfer duty, but still great reading and hilarious, we all responded. I wrote a letter to Tamlin. Like, this is the worst thing I've ever seen. He's not great. We have so much better voices here, and he should sound more like Spicoli from Fast Times at Ridgemont High, and da-da-da-da-da-da-da. Like a good paragraph. And she wrote back, nobody cares what you think. Which I thought was awesome. Like I get it. Because she says, you could have said in one thing, I don't think he matches the voice in my head. And that's the age-old story of all voice recording issues. So I appreciated that. It was an important learning thing for me in my career. Like anybody can complain, but you got to understand what it takes for all the work to get done, and your complaint has to be constructive. You can't just be, I don't like it because of X, Y, or Z. And I don't think I ever did that again. Like I think that matured me almost. Well, it didn't totally mature me, but it matured me on that front. Like I qualitatively, I never approached someone else's work the same way again after that moment. So I owe Tamlin a big thank you for telling me to STF.
Well, if you had replaced Danny Delk in Day of the Tentacle, then we wouldn't have gotten the voice of Purple Tentacle and Green Tentacle and George Washington.
Right, for sure. And that was probably part of the equation too. And Hoagie was a good job. Well, Hoagie had a lot of lines. That was a big character in the game. So, yeah, I was wrong. I was wrong 150%. I'll admit it now. But at the time, I really thought I was in that part of life where you felt like if you were upset, then you deserved people to make changes for you. And I didn't have. I was very, very self-righteous about it because I was so sure I was right. And I wasn't, and it was a good learning experience.
That same year, 7 Max See the Road was also released. And 7 Max See the Road was the first of many 7 Max projects that you've worked on. Were you a fan of the series at that time?
No, I know Mike Levine was into it, and he showed me the comics, and I was into Bizarre, and I'm like, wow, this is great. Like, this is amazing. It's so imaginative and creative, and I want to be part of it. And so I knew a little bit of what Mike was arteching, and I had read the comics, but I didn't come in there to work on Sam and Max. I didn't know who they were or what it was about until I was inside LucasArts. But once inside, and once I started working on it, I just fell in love with it. And I think as a creative, it's like impossible not to, if you have a sense of humor.
Mm-hmm. A very specific type of sense of humor.
Yeah. Well, there's that. Yeah, a weird sense of humor. But they'll do it. He'll take anything. They'll make anything a joke. Anything can be funny. You can go after anything, and at the same time, it's smart funny. It's not. Some of it's ridiculous funny, but it makes a lot of good points about popular culture, and it's satire. It's it's not simple, which I really appreciate. And some of the work I'm proudest of from able to get things into people's heads that you don't get to say much in a very commercial world, like make real comments about important things, came, hidden in messages in the Sam & Max years that I've spent with Sam & Max, from my own personal perspective. So yeah, I wasn't hugely into it. I didn't know Steve, but I jumped right in and started testing, and I ended up being the lead tester on Sam & Max Freelance Police.
In Sam & Max Hit the Road, there were several mini games included in the game. However, unlike the Whack-A-Mole game that was necessary to advance the story, most of these mini games were mainly for fun. Were they given a lower testing priority because of that?
No, because once you've played, it's interesting. This is a kind of a sausage is made type of thing, but from a QA perspective, it's almost like you're there however many hours a day you're at testing that day, and if it's a story thing, you've seen the bits, you've done the puzzles, but getting better from a gamer perspective, getting better at the mini games, like getting 30 instead of 20 on Whack-A-Rat, or even as many as you possibly can, like whoever had the highest score, that was a real point of pride. So people played the crap out of it just because it was playing. Not that playing an adventure game isn't playing, but once you've got, I don't know, 1,000 hours in, it starts to get a little redundant, right? So you could take a break and play Whack-A-Mole for an hour, and that's all the testing it really needed once they kind of got it working. It wasn't that sophisticated. So I would say actually the mini games in Sam & Max Hit the Road were probably over tested at the end of the day, because it was in test for so long, working out all the story issues and pulling the whole thing together. The mini games you could just do an hour a day. You could have one tester do 1 8-hour day on the mini games and be fine,
The following year, LucasArts released a collection of several LucasArts classics like Indiana Jones and the Fate of Atlantis, Sam & Max Hit the Road, Day of the Tentacle, and Rebel Assault Playable Demo. And you're the senior lead tester on that collection.
That's my credit, huh? Senior lead tester.
Mm-hmm. Now, I know that you've tested Sam & Max and Day of the Tentacle because you were credited on them, but with regards to Indiana Jones and the Fate of Atlantis and the Rebel Assault playable demo, did you actually test them, or were you just supervising the entire QA process with regards to things that were already tested originally in these games?
Yeah, I was more overseeing it. Like, I think at that point, that would be just too much content for me to play everything. And I probably had 3 or 4 different people, and it was more about directing each of the discs to make sure that they were, at the state they needed to be to ship. So I was probably more looking at different testing reports and making sure the right tests were done on each thing based on the kind of the state they were in. Like, I would think, I don't know if the indie stuff was updated with, I forget whether we just like how we packaged that indie. We turned indie into a CD. I think it was just the disc-based game on the CD. So I don't think there was a lot. It just needed to get installed from the CD, I think.
At that time, the talkie version was already released. In 1992, the floppy version came out, and in 93, the talkie version of Fate of Atlantis came out. So I presume that that collection had the talkie version.
So it took the talkie, yeah. So that was already done and tested and shipped. So I'm sure it was just kind of compiling what was already done together into a package, and then writing the different readmes and, putting the instruction booklet together and making sure all the burns went good and making sure all the CDs came off with all the data, more like that than actual. I mean, there's a lot of different ways of testing product, and debugging core code, in qualitatively reviewing assets, and making sure the packaging is tight and that everything runs are kind of different things,
So you tested nothing and got all the credit.
Well, I made sure it all worked.
Kidding.
And maybe I was the most senior because I did lead Sam and Mac. So, what else was on a Rebel, right? Rebel 2, you said?
No, Rebel 1 playable demo.
Rebel 1 playable demo. Oh, it was just a demo.
Probably the first chapter or first 2 and 3 chapters.
Yeah, well, I did build that demo. I did burn that on the CD and see it through. And maybe Vince did that, but I think I was responsible for demos at that point. But it was just one of many things that went into pulling the product together.
And how was it decided which parts of the game would be included in the demo? Was it something that you decided on your own by playing the game and seeing which of the parts may be welcoming to new players, or was it done by other people?
It was dev, QA, and marketing. Like marketing would say, we want this. Dev would say, we can deliver this. QA would say, well, that's not fun, or that's buggy, or it'd take too long to test that. They'll say, well, what if we delivered this? And then, marketing would say, well, it has to have this. And would say, well, if we do this, we can test that up to the level that it needs to be to ship. And then development would say, okay, we can do that, but it's going to take a different focus, from what we were originally planning, and all that would get negotiated, and ultimately the producer would decide. Usually the producer the project leader kind of always said, this is the code I'm going to give you at the end of the day, because they were responsible for pulling everything together. So I'm sure Vince Lee had a ton to say about what it should be. And we kind of all said, okay, marching orders, let's go. Let's get the data and let's close it up.
The following year, Rebel Assault 2 came out. That served as LucasArts' entry into the world of FMV. Now, even though they already incorporated full motion videos in the first Rebel Assault 2 years prior to that, this sequel featured high-quality videos with newly filmed scenes. Did this pose any particular challenge in terms of testing?
No, because it was the challenges with Rebel were all Rebel 1 related, I felt. Because Rebel 2 kind of took a lot of the known systems and then just improved everything. It kind of improved everything based on the fact that the video was easier to, I don't know about easier to do, but we had more strategies for doing full motion video, which was Mike Levine was doing a lot of that, actually, Mike and Vince, and a lot of that bled into Jedi Knight, which was to come later. But Rebel 1 had kind of set the bar for what the game could be. When Rebel 1 came out, that idea that you were flying through the caverns and it actually looked like a scene from the movie, that it was a playable movie, that was a huge moment for Star Wars games. That was a huge moment for LucasArts, and it was a huge moment for CD-ROMs. I think Myst and Rebel Assault were basically considered, the biggest thing in games that year. I remember it being mentioned they were playing it on Beverly Hills 90210, which was an old television show, but it was a big mainstream show, and they were like, we're playing Rebel Assault. But that was painful. I mean, that was like, there was a lot going on in teaching a mass audience how to load a CD-ROM game, how to play a PC game, what a playable movie actually feels like. I ended up working the other side. That there was so much sophistication in trying to get the CD-ROM drivers to load and the CD to put out a high enough resolution for the game to run fluidly, that there was a lot of work to do just to get people to load their CD-ROM drivers and have enough memory to run the game. So there was just a lot of like boot disk management to get people launched. That was really kind of a complicated notion for, imagine a Mac user today trying to use a boot disk, right? So there was that. And then I remember that there was the, in the ravine, you would always come down and the full motion video would take you to the right. But at the same time, the canyon diverged to the left. So you looked at a fork in the road, and every time the game went to the right because it was on rails, and so many people called in and said, my joypad's broken, or my joystick's broken, my flight controller's broken. I'm turning to the left and it's not going left. And it was a really hard product support answer to be like, well, you really can't. It's not broken. You just actually can't turn left. But from a lessons learned standpoint, and like the illusion of interactivity, especially from a full motion video, film quality standpoint, don't do that. Like, don't put a fork. If you can only go one way, don't put a choice to go another way. Right. That's why nowadays you see all the walls put in front of things, and you just don't do that anymore. But at that time we did that, and that was in the first 10 minutes of the game. Mm-hmm. So, all these people are like, it's broken. Like, well, no, that's not the way it works. It made it past that, and Rebel Assault was a huge seller because it looked like the film. I don't think Rebel Assault 2 sold as well as Rebel Assault 1 did. I think the novelness of playing the movie was more relevant in 1 than it was in 2. So even though the video quality was great and the new Star Wars scenes were there, and I think it still sold really well, I just don't think it was on that massive scale that Rebel Assault 1 was. But
I guess that at that point in time, rail shooters were less popular, given the fact that games like Doom and other first-person shooters came out, which gave you a lot more freedom than a rail shooter would.
Yeah, and the other thing you were going to compare Rebel Assault against was X-Wing
mm-hmm.
and TIE Fighter, which were the best flight sims ever made, and probably the best Star Wars games ever made. My humble opinion, but Larry Holland was genius, and those games were amazing. And those games, I mean, when I went to work at LucasArts in 1993, maybe 94, we'd have that old PC Gamer magazine, or one of the other one, maybe not PC Gamer, one of the ones that didn't make it, Computer Gaming World maybe, and they had the top 100 games, PC games listed. For like the first 25 months of my job, they were all LucasArts products. And it was X-Wing, and then it was TIE Fighter, and then it was Monkey, and Dot and Sam & Max. They were always the top 5, and it was and X-Wing or TIE Fighter was always at the top of the list. So, there's a big difference between Rebel Assault and X-Wing, and there's a marketing issue there that we didn't know, we weren't expecting to have to deal with. But a lot of people did have flight sticks because they had played X-Wing, or I don't know if XVT was probably out at the same. TIE Fighter was probably the more recent game, but they were using that, like they were expecting the same experience as X-Wing and TIE Fighter for a big chunk of PC gamers, and that just wasn't the way it was. But it still succeeded outside of it. It reached a whole new audience of more mainstream gamers, which was what they always wanted to do with the Star Wars franchise. Like, why we have a franchise worth, however much at the time, may have been $1 billion at the time, and we're selling it to a market of 300,000 people. This should sell 3 or 4 million units. And I think Rebel Assault came closer to doing it than X-Wing TIE Fighter ever did, as great as those games were.
You mentioned that the setup of these CD-ROM games was very convoluted at times. Did you have any feedback regarding the setup of these games? Was it part of your playtesting? Did you have the ability to let them know, okay, this part of the setup is really complicated? Can you simplify it a bit?
Well, we had a compatibility lab, and they were great. Chip Hindenburg, Doyle Gilstrap, Lynn Taylor, Scott Taylor, Dan Mahoric. Sorry for anybody whose name I can't ring off at the moment, but it was a great group, and they tested every piece of hardware. And it came to it's the age-old games development conversation. You want it to look like this. It needs to be on a CD. How many are in the market that currently have integrated CD-ROM drives? It's a smaller percentage of the market. So we need to enable add-on CD-ROM drives. Okay, so if we do that, how do you load them into memory? Well, you go into the autoexec.bat, and you change these 3 lines, and you reload, and then you load it into memory, but you can't do it till after the game.
Mm-hmm.
And anybody knows, that was around at that time, which was one of the reasons why selling X-Wing to 300,000 people that knew what they were doing was easier than selling Rebel Assault to 2 million people who didn't know what they were doing, who had twice the challenge or 3 times the challenge in actually getting the technology to work. So we became good. That was a big part of my job, and a big part of what I feel like kind of helped me in my career always was how do you explain to people the information they need to experience the content? Because the next thing that came up, the CD-ROM drive thing was like I'd walk in the park compared to Win95 in DOS mode. And we had to do backwards compatibility on all of that. So that was like, serious stuff. And one other thing I had done at the time that no one ever talks about, and I did do all the work and got the credit for it, was Star Wars Screensaver, which was running on Macs and PCs, and basically was testing a screensaver, which we had never done before. They ended up calling it Star Wars Screen Entertainment. And that actually had audio, in Windows 3.1 running all the time. So trying to get Windows audio to work in Windows 3.1, let's just say I wouldn't put anyone else through it. Maybe you had to do it, but imagine having to do it for multiple sound cards. Anyway, so all of that led to like 95 and DOS mode, and that huge transition of getting to Microsoft, getting to Windows. But it's definitely all related that time of getting the PC rig up and running to support this level of content that people wanted to do was a huge task, getting people to understand it.
Well, that's why us 90s kids are so tech savvy, because of these things.
Well, you didn't have a choice, right? Well, and that's why I always say it's funny as we moved later and we started talking about making adventure games easier, which I know this is a controversial topic you could have all day. In the day when you made them in 91 and 92, it was about prove how smart you are. Right now, I'm going to give you a problem, and you're going to prove how smart you are. And that was what that audience wanted, because they had already crossed a whole bunch of things to prove how smart they were just to get the game started in the first place. So that's what they were into. But as we started adding people who weren't, who just aren't that type of thinker. I started to say Dave Grossman and I would have the conversation all the time. Say, look, it's not about people proving how smart they are. It's about you making them think they're smart. And that was always a big push and pull, for between us as we developed the games that became Sam and Max and Tales and Back to the Future and hint systems and things like that. I want the guy that needed 8 hints to solve the puzzle to feel as smart as the guy that figured it out the minute he saw it.
Exactly. I always considered running the game as the first puzzle of each game. Once you get it running, everything else is easy. Monkey Wrench in Monkey 2 is nothing compared to getting more buffer in your memory to run. 1 year later, the game Rebel Assault 2 was also released for the PlayStation, with you being credited as the QA supervisor. Usually games that are released on both PC and Mac are expected to function identically on both platforms. But here we are dealing with the contrast between PC and console. These platforms have different technical specifications, and that is why the PlayStation version differs from the PC version. They added 3D models, and they also changed the UI in certain levels. So when it came to testing the PlayStation version, did you approach it as a completely new game? Or did you see it as an enhancement of the original altogether?
Well, I mean, you would never see it as a new game if it's the same kind of user flow, right? Because the biggest challenge always in testing is getting to the moment of fun. So if you've done the work to get the game where you know that this level is fun because it's balanced, is fun because it's these enemies work and this type of thing, you know, that's like 70% of the work, let's say. So if you have to go and make choices about aesthetics from that baseline of something you already know is fun and has been received well, it's still a different task than building something from scratch. You do have to make changes to adjust to it. But I would think most of those changes were done for performance reasons. Like, we want the same performance on the PlayStation as we do on the PC. And then it's like, oh, this scene is dropping to a frame rate that's unacceptable. And you say, okay, well, why is it unacceptable? And what can we do to make it better? But it's not like this level sucks, to put it bluntly. Or I turn this corner and the world explodes, which you would do on a new game. It wasn't like that. I mean, sometimes when there's like a new memory makeup, or, the way the box handles memory is different than the way the PC handles memory, then you do need to check every corner and make sure that the integrity of the geometry still exists, or that you're not, running out of memory and the whole thing shutting down. Those become the bugs. But I think no matter what, the lead SKU captures the hardest part of the game industry, which is creating something that feels fun and it feels interesting and entertaining. And once you have that, turning and putting it on to other things is just keeping those elements that are fun in the experience.
So regardless of the amount of changes that had to be done on a certain platform, you'd never consider it a remaster. You'd consider it just another version. Because, for example, I'm fast forwarding the Sam and Max remasters of the Telltale games at Skunk Ape.
Mm-hmm.
They're remasters. They're built from scratch using various elements from the original while running on modern machines. Do you consider it as the original game with just cosmetic changes, or a whole new game?
Well, I don't consider it a whole new game. I consider it a better experience, because we've been able to look back at it and we've been able to upgrade the technology to make it look a lot better in a lot of different places. But it's the same script, it's the same voice, it's the same jokes, it's the same puzzles, it's all of that is the same. So, I think if you thought about a movie, like writing and filming a movie the first time, like The Usual Suspects or something, once you've captured that, you have a magical formula. Then it's like, okay, how do I update it with new things to keep people interested in new times and new eras? But you don't rewrite the movie, right? You're not going back in and saying, because I think when you're saying that all new assets or a whole new game, it's a new game. It's new content that no one's ever seen before. But we're talking about 8 hours of content. The remaster, we're talking about 8 hours of content that has been tested and played and looked at and reviewed, and all we're doing is just dialing it up and making it.
Yeah, but in modern. The back end, everything's different. You have a new engine. Even though the front end may seem the same, although with a higher resolution, the back end is vastly different.
Well, I mean, in the case of Sam & Max, it's just the iterations of the Telltale tool And the Telltale tool was always built in a way that the old we kept it. This was Kevin Bruner's big thing, and he's always been brilliant for it. We always pulled the old content back into the engine so that we could move to a new platform and the game would be there. So when we moved this, when we took the existing Sam and Mac assets and dropped them into the modern Telltale engine, it basically turned on a bunch of new functionality that we could then polish up. So it's not as dramatic as you're saying, but I would even argue in what you're saying, the back end needs to support the front end. When the back end and the front end are being developed together, it's a different challenge than saying, this is the game, now get it to run on a new platform. Because the game works. Games die on the vine because they never come together. Like things that never made it, Duke Nukem Forever. Maybe Duke Nukem Forever made it. I don't know, but It was a long time. Eventually, yeah. Some didn't, right? Sam and Max Freelance Police. Whatever's been canceled. There's lots of canceled products in the world. They get canceled because they never come together. They never get to a place where they could be shipped. They never come to a place where the game experience feels like fun. Or enough fun, or critical mass of fun. So once you're over that hump, if it's just a technical challenge to get the back end to work, not to diminish technical challenge, there's no risk of it's not going to be good once we do it. But a new game, there's the risk. We can do all this technical work. We might not be able to get it up and running in the first place because the development process is so, people don't know what they're doing and everything's overbuilt and the idea sucks to begin with, right? There's that. Or there's just, we're too late, we're too early on this platform or whatever. But once you're past that risk is so huge that nothing else compares. Once you're past that risk, everything else is just do more of it, make more of it happen, do whatever you got to do to get it wherever it needs to be. But now you're surfing new technology. You're not creating brand new products. The challenge between the two is so immensely different, in my mind, that I would never consider it the same.
You also did some additional testing on Full Throttle. Now, unlike the mini games in Sam & Max, which were mostly there for fun, the action sequences in Full Throttle played a crucial role. Did you have any specific feedback regarding the action sequences?
I feel like I spent a lot of time on the demolition derby with the cranes in the junkyard. Mm-hmm. I'm trying to think what the issue was there, but it had this double combination of needing to get it working and needing to get it balanced, and you couldn't tell which was hampering which. You know what I mean? There was one of those situations. And it was key to unlocking the puzzle to move forward. So because it was integrated, it was a blocker bug for the whole thing, or it was like, okay, skip it, get the thing you need and keep playing. But that just doesn't work right now. So it added another level of complication to the process. I remember riding the bikes and choosing to kick versus or punch. And that one we played a lot of because it was like, okay, what are we comparing it to? Because I don't know if Road Rage was out at the time or, there was a motorcycle game out at the time where you could fight with the other guy on the other bike. Can't remember which one it was, but it was, okay, is that what we're going for? Is that what we're trying to do? Or are you supposed to be thinking, oh, I should kick now because I read this what's the adventure game element of this action? Because the action element of it isn't fun enough to compete against the action games that are doing this full time. So what's the point? Is it a breakup? Is it to capture? Is it because we need this because it's a biker game and you need some motorcycle riding to make it feel like a motorcycle game and we can play the cool. Who did the soundtrack for Full Throttle? Do you remember?
Gone Jackals.
The Gone Jackals. They played our Christmas party too.
Really?
That was so fun.
Wow.
Yeah, it was awesome. They put on a good show. Heavy metal wasn't exactly everybody's cup of tea at Lucas, but that was everyone put it on for that. I remember Jack Sorensen got up on stage. The president got up on stage, and I think he had a big long-haired wig on and everything. Anyway, it was an awesome rap party. And so do you do this? So back to the question, why do you do the mini games? Why do you integrate them in the game? What are you trying to capture? And I do think, with the music playing in the background, it was a fun 5 or 10 minutes of adventure gaming in a different context. And I don't know, do you think people liked it, or do you think people were like, I just want to get through it so I can get back to puzzling? Or I do remember it also being a bit of a product support issue because, some of the adventure gamers were like, I just can't click the mouse fast enough or whatever. They just weren't into anything that had to do with reflex was like, they didn't want anything to do with it. So what did you what did you think of it?
Well, I like action games as much as I like adventure games. Well, I like adventure games more, but I play action games. So I can go through these stages in the game, but I do not expect them to be in an adventure game. And so I know that a lot of the feedback that came from Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade was the fact that the fist fighting was mandatory in the game. And so when it came to Fate of Atlantis, then you have 3 paths that you can choose between. So you have one that's more action-packed, and you have one that's more adventure-gamey. And since Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, they just added skip buttons to each one of these action sequences. So with Indiana Jones and the Fate of Atlantis, you could click the 0 button on the numpad, and Indy would give a super punch, and then the fight would be over, and Indy would win. And the same goes for Full Throttle. You could click Control W, and it would skip the action sequences. So I think they knew that adventure gamers wouldn't like it that much, and gave them a chance to skip it. But they tried to make the gameplay a bit more diverse than before, while still allowing adventure gamers to have an adventure game only experience by having these skip buttons.
Yeah, and I think the mantra at the time was grow the audience. Let's get more people engaged. So make the puzzles a little easier and make some types of gameplay that they understand on a different level. But it's hard because you can't get it. Both of them have to be. Something has to be great to stand out in the games industry, because whatever's the hottest title is going to be great for whatever reason. For whatever reason, it catches on. I think was it. I don't know what was the big game in '95. We probably passed Doom. I don't know if we were already at Diablo or not, but whatever it was, people were playing. It was great at what it did. So it's hard to serve 2 masters, I think we did a good job on it. It was all looming and setting up on what would eventually become, the PlayStation 2 version of Full Throttle. But I do think the idea was that if you're going to have a biker guy, you got to have biker riding experiences. My favorite scene was there was this funny song Dave Grossman wrote the lyrics. I think there was this funny song about the end of the world in the junkyard.
Yeah.
We sang that all the time. Oh, that was ridiculous. But yeah, that's what I remember about that.
That same year, The Dig came out. And as you're well aware, it had 4 different iterations, with the final one being the one that actually shipped by Sean Clark.
Mm-hmm.
During your time at LucasArts, did you see or get to test any of the previous versions?
No. I only tested it I only tested the final dig.
And the final dig had the infamous turtle puzzle, in which you had to assemble the skeleton of a turtle in order to revive it. A puzzle that people still think to this day that it was really obtuse. Interestingly, there's
that's saying something in the adventure game world.
people forgave the monkey wrench puzzle, but for some reason they don't forgive Sean Clark or whoever was in charge of that puzzle for that puzzle. Now, interestingly, there's a fossil in the next room that displays the solution to the puzzle. But previous screenshots from a few months prior to the game's release suggest that that fossil was not always there, which indicates to me that it was possibly added at the last minute, likely due to response from playtesters. Do you remember that puzzle?
Yeah, I had forgotten about it, but I definitely remember. It all comes back to me when you mention it, and that would be consistent with a solution that would get offered from QA to marketing to Sean and in the team about a way to provide people with some information to solve the puzzle. It's interesting we put it in the room after, because if we put it in the room before, maybe it would have had a different impact and more people would have been able to solve the puzzle. But someone probably said, no, well, you can't just give them the answer before they do the puzzle. But sometimes it's worth it just for pacing, and I think that's been an always conversation too, between test and design and development and production. How many puzzles are in this game? They don't all have to be brain breakers. And what if we make it easy for some people? But yeah, that seems like what would happen. So what we used to do at LucasArts was, when the game got to a certain state where I think it was beta, I think everything had to be in probably by that time with the dig, would do a thing called a pizza orgy. Which was fun, but not as fun as the name would entail. Where they're bringing a bunch of pizza and everyone would sit down and play the game. And it's likely that there was a whole bunch of feedback coming out of that puzzle was too hard. And then we came back with the solution to put the skeleton in the other room, or the imprint
Awesome.
in the other room.
And still in 1995, which seemed to be pretty busy for you guys, Dark Forces was released. On Dark Forces, you're credited for project coordination. Considering that your roles around that time were primarily focused on QA, what specific responsibilities did this role involve?
Well, project coordination was kind of bringing a tighter relationship between production and QA. And, my primary, the thing I did, most every day was pull the builds together. So I would make the builds, and pump out all the CDs and hand them out into tests. But I would also go around and round up the content to go into the builds. So it was kind of a, when I showed up at your desk and was like, so is it done yet? I wasn't just asking, so is it done yet? Because, oh, it's done. Check. Oh, not today, but maybe tomorrow. Check. It was like, is it done? Because in the next 15 minutes, I'm going to push the button that puts it in the next build. So whatever your answer is, I definitely need to know in a very real way. Right. So it was different. It was different than producing in that, as I moved older in my career, the production and assistants and the producers, it kind of there was a vagueness between when they asked you if something was done or not and what that really meant, but when I was doing it then, it was like the button gets pushed, and if it's not in there, then Darren Stinnett's going to play it and Ray Gresko is going to play it, and they're not going to see it. And I think they're expecting it, so that was my main job. But I got brought on there because Steve Dodderman, Darren Stinnett was the project leader, and he had a lot of experience. He'd come over from Spectrum Holobyte, and I think he came with Ray Gresko. I don't think Rob Hubner was on Dark Forces, but it was a great team. They were amazing. And I remember Winston Wolfe, maybe he was Jedi too, but they brought me in because Steve left the company. He was the director of development, but he was also one of the executive producers on Dark Forces, and he left to go to Activision. So Jack brought me in and said, "Hey, we got it. This thing isn't closed yet. Can you come up and help fill in with Steve, close it down, help get it closed down, and get it out?" And I said, "Sure." He said, "Well, I'm not sure we can call you a producer because we don't have producers here. And, what do you want your credit to be?" And I said, "Well, I'll just call it project coordination or something." But I think it was the prototype for what would eventually become more of like a build producer type of person at LucasArts, and build producer and kind of a closing producer at LucasArts. When I was QA supervisor, I focused on multiplayer testing. And that was probably like one of the most amazing times of my life, it was just such a puzzle. We had no idea. We'd never done it before. We had no idea what we were doing. We had no idea how to test it. So ultimately what happened would be I would stand in the middle of the test pit at the time. And we had about probably 50 testers at this point. So I'd probably get 13 people on the multiplayer team. Maybe 8, maybe smaller, because the games weren't as big back then. And this was for like Mysteries of the Sith and Jedi, the shooters, Outlaws, the shooters. I'd stand in the middle of the pit and I'd yell directions at people to test things. So I'd be like, "Okay, everybody run into the chamber. Okay, point your gun up at the ceiling. Okay, load your machine gun. Okay, rapid fire into that orb at the top of the ceiling. Okay, everyone pull out an explosive, shoot it into it." The whole game would blow up. And then would report it. These were the steps. But it needed this coordination to get it wasn't testing where it was just like one person creating the circumstance and remembering it. It was orchestrating 8 people to take actions and then documenting what caused the bug. So I just had, my brain was just on fire. I just had so much fun doing it. It was just like destroying everything, and then reporting it. They appreciated it, but I do remember there's a funny story because I'd always do a thing called white flag. So it was like, if we came into a room and we needed to, I'd let people play. I'd yell like free play, and everyone would run around and frag each other, and Pitchfork would be shooting at someone else, and they'd be getting frags. They'd be yelling at each other. "Yes, yeah, I got you." Da, 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 da. They'd be having fun. So we'd be testing the fun of it. But then something would happen, and I'd yell white flag, and that basically meant everyone stop. And then I'd say, "Okay, everyone come to this room," and they'd all come into the room, would start talking about what we did. Inevitably, someone who was like down in the frag count or whatever would come running into the room with their machine gun and just shoot everybody in the room. And I'm like, "Don't you know what white flag means, younger?" So, that didn't happen all the time, but it happened enough. So at one point I created a thing that was called the purple flag, which meant everybody kill a particular tester for the next 5 minutes. And you just hear them be like, "Hey, get off me. Hey, leave me alone." And be running around. So anyway, that was how I amused myself.
So you guys basically pioneered testing of multiplayer games, because at that time you didn't have anything else to take as example of how to actually test a multiplayer game, because there are things to handle like lag and the amount of players. And I'm sure that unlike bugs in a game, there are bugs in games that are hard to reproduce, but eventually it's something in a contained space that you did a certain set of actions that led to that bug. But with multiplayer games, you have to have so many circumstances align at a certain point to reproduce that bug. So how exactly were you able to report bugs in this situation?
Well, you'd figure out the actions that were dangerous. Like a lot of times, like I said, you'd pull out I forget what the super gun was in Jedi, but it made a huge explosion. So bring one person in to test it. He runs and shoots it in every room. Nothing happens. You give 4 people to do it and it's too much. So you dial back on it to say, okay, if 8 people are going to do it, this is what we need. This is the maximum amount of sprites we can use for the explosion, or whatever parameter you want to set. But it was definitely all about parameters and waiting times, like in spawn points, and everything needed. It wasn't about, an adventure game is like, if I use the banana in the electric socket, then the light turns off and it's supposed to turn on. Very straightforward. But everything in the multiplayer games was like, this is a safe place to spawn in this area. Don't spawn in any of these areas. Don't spawn 2 people at once. Wait 40 seconds before the next spawn. Limit the amount of effects used in this room at all times to a maximum of this, because you don't need effects off everybody's gun, because 1 or 2 is enough to fill the screen anyway. So you're just overusing things. So it was a lot of taking things and just figuring out when you kind of put them, building out kind of worst case scenarios, and then saying, okay, let's put bubble wrap around it and make it a safe thing. But it was awesome. I mean, it was, we were kicking ass at that point. It was fun.
Awesome.
And XVT was harder. XVT was harder. Because it was just, the shooters were like, at least they were all shooters. And I was like, hey, now let's do, so good job. Now let's do X versus TIE Fighter. And you're flying around, and lag was no joke, But Dan Pettit came in and helped me on that. And that was a fun one. I mean, that was fun to test too, because it was multiplayer. So we let people play for a while once it stabilized. But yeah, that was 94, 95.
No, it was 96 and 97. There were several games that were released that had multiplayer capabilities in them. And you also had to deal with things like adding Windows 95 support, given that Windows 95, which today celebrates its 20th anniversary, you had to test that as well.
Yeah, and network protocols weren't what they used to be. You kind of, with the network's setup, you kind of went back a little bit towards the day of, it wasn't as bad as boot disks. And remember LAN parties?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Those were the thing.
Yeah. Yeah. That was cool. So you had to account for different network setups too. We learned a lot.
Despite having tested several 3D titles at that time at LucasArts, Grim Fandango was the first adventure game to be in 3D. Did this present any specific challenges in the testing process compared to the first-person shooters and the sims that you had already tested around that time, having 3D graphics?
Well, we were total pros with Scum. So the fact that it wasn't Scum anymore was like, okay, I don't blame it. They needed to make the change, but testing Scum at that point was like, everybody knew how to do it. It's interesting, right? That kind of organizational intelligence and the value of organizational intelligence. And then when you throw it out to move to the new thing, is it worth what you get in return? And did you do it at the right time? So, and I'm not saying it was the wrong decision for Grim Fandango, because it's a beautiful game and one of the best games of all time. And we needed to move in that direction anyway. And it pushed a lot. That technology got used on multiple projects after. So it was a good investment, but it was hard to test for sure. It was harder than the Scum games, without a doubt. But the development was harder too. So we had longer in test. We were able to figure stuff out. Like the Scum games would drop in and they'd be like, there'd be the art wouldn't be ready, and we'd be playing through, drawn content, and then would get the logic all working, and then they'd drop the assets in, and then boom, ship it. Not that simple, but it was pretty good by that point. And Grim Fandango was not that. But it's a lot of waiting for stuff to come in. It's a lot of like, oh, is that level done yet? No. So test this level again. Or is that level ready? No. It's just a new way of doing things. And point and click definitely was impacted by it. Geometry was more of an issue. You didn't have clipping issues in Scum games or, anything like that.
Exactly. You had to allow Manny to take out the scythe at any location. Sometimes when you were too close to the wall, it probably posed a problem. So did you guys actually test all of these things?
I think so, yeah. In one or two rooms, you find the problem. You find as a tester, when you're testing software, you're unearthing the things that are broken. And if it's broken in one room, like the scythe, it's broken in one room, it's going to be broken in every room. So it's not like you necessarily need to go back and always test it everywhere. It's like you say, in this context, it will break the game in this way. Here's the fix. Theoretically, what situations will this fix take care of? It'll take care of 80% of the issues. Okay, well, let's spot check that and see if that's true. And if it cuts through one or two things, but it doesn't really negatively impact the user experience, you leave it be. You don't say, let's take another pass at the technology and see if we can get the last 20%. If it's a time consuming thing that could be better spent on something that the users are going to see more. And that's all just an example I'm making up, but it is the type of choices that you would make. That's the type of conversation you would have about that. And now I don't know what Brett said about it, but because people are perfectionists too, that's part of the curse and the blessing of the industry. People care a lot and they can't stand to see something wrong. And I get it. I've been lucky myself to be like, good enough is good enough for me, like if people don't care, if you care and other people don't care, leave it be, because you could be doing something other people care about. And that is constant battle in game development with everybody. But it's part of the personality trait of any creative, I suppose.
And it seems that a lot of the projects that you've worked on, especially around that time, pioneered a certain technology that you weren't acquainted with because it just came out. So, for example, you had to test multiplayer games for the first time. You had to test 3D adventure games for the first time. You had to test talkie versions for the first time. So all of these things, how did you as a company and how did you personally come up with ways to test these things that you are not even aware of the ways that they can break or malfunction?
Well, it's funny because it's funny. I'm going to totally date myself. I think it was around the Iraq War, and Dick Cheney was speaking, and he said something to the effect of, there's known unknowns and there's unknown unknowns. And it's not the known unknowns you need to worry about. It's the unknown unknowns you need to worry about. And people that didn't work in game development were like, that's the biggest crock of crap I've ever heard in my life. And I get it. I was like, I know what he's saying. That's true. It is the unknown unknowns. Because the known unknowns, that's what you make a plan to address. And you say, okay, we don't know this going in. How can we get as much information as possible around it? If information doesn't exist, how do we start? What do we think is going to break about it? Because we'd had enough experience doing it at that point too. Like we'd seen a lot, and everything. Nothing just started from the ground, from nowhere. Everything was building on something else. So we kind of knew how we got here, and then to say, okay, what are we taking on that's new, and how do we get to I guess nowadays you'd call it the minimum viable product level of execution, where you could say, okay, this is sane. Let's continue to this degree, or this is never going to work, or everybody's going to this is going to kill us as a group. And I think we were arrogant, and we knew a lot, but we were also arrogant enough to take on the stuff that, we'll figure it out. We're the best in the business. We'll figure it out. And I think from 97 to 99, that's what kind of put us in the crapper. That's what really, we bit off way more than we should have thought we could chew, but we thought we could chew it, and I'm not talking QA necessarily, because I think QA, we were at the tail end of a lot of stuff, and we were always waiting on stuff to figure it out. And we weren't expected to figure out a ton of stuff, though we did. We were a very proactive QA that helped development in a lot of ways to make that quality product through 97 or so. But the company, things got more complicated, and the people at the company started to think we could figure out anything or power through anything. And that's the thing that created all the bad vibes and the negative feelings about, oh my God, what am I being asked to do? Who's asked me to run through a brick wall again? Earlier, we didn't really have that problem because the walls weren't as tough, and we always made it through to the other side with a product that people looked at and said, that was great. So it was worth it. But I don't know, I guess that's a long-winded answer to your question, but that's how I kind of see it philosophically. We cut our teeth growing from floppy PC games to through Windows 95 to network play, and we were pretty smart. But the consoles and the scale of production required to execute against the consoles as it got bigger, it was less about like kind of technological savvy and more about production organization. And that's an expensive thing to learn on the fly,
Speaking of things that can malfunction, the 90s almost ended at that point. And so as someone who spent so much time on testing, I always wondered, what did LucasArts do in terms of preparation for the Y2K bug? Did you play Monkey Island 2 from beginning to end at the end of 1999 to see if it would crash?
Well, I was in development at that time. I was producing at that time. We were in development. We were just like, we were letting other SKUs kind of take the heat. And I think we might have turned the clocks ahead on I think compatibility probably handled it and probably turned all the clocks ahead on all the computers in the compatibility lab, and then simulated the minute of the time. And I think they probably found a couple things, and I think we bulletproofed against it on some level. Like it triggered it. It wasn't like it didn't cause anything. But I think if we caught it, it was fixable. It didn't seem like there was anything horrible was going to happen. It just became the worry of, well, is our simulation the same as what's going to happen in reality? And at the end of the day, our simulation was good enough. But who knows what work everyone did at Windows to make sure that that it didn't blow up too. They had to keep the back end. The platforms that the games were running on needed to maintain stability, and if that happened, then they'd be fine. If that didn't happen, then it wouldn't be our fault necessarily. We'd just scramble to fix it.
Exactly. The fact that nothing happened doesn't mean that nothing wouldn't have happened if people wouldn't have fixed whatever issues that were with. At that time, people weren't using DOS, but with Windows 95 or Windows 98.
Yeah, it gives the impression, it's funny because it gives the impression of like a chicken little thing, but anyone that's savvy knows that's not the case. It's like it could have been, the future could have gone one way, but the future went a different way because people took it seriously and understood that there could be real ramifications and acted accordingly with, without running around like chickens with their heads cut off in like a fear-mongered state of confusion, but like this is the problem, let's address it,
In my conversation with Aaron Giles, he told me that in the early 2000s, he worked on various Mac ports and updated Windows launchers for classic point-and-click adventure games, which weren't that compatible with Windows XP and sometimes with Windows 98. And these were never released due to lack of available QA resources or lack of interest from LucasArts. Was that actually the case?
Well, I wasn't in QA at that point.
I know, but you were at the company, so I'm asking as someone who was at the company.
I think it was more like, everything was market driven by that point. And I think adventure games were on kind of the outs. And I think the Mac wasn't considered a real gaming platform. So Aaron was so brilliant. They were letting him do it because it was his passion. And they figured if he was working on his passion, then he'd also help with some other stuff. And his code would feed back in. And they were probably serious. They wouldn't have asked him to do it at all if they didn't think there was a way to make it a reality. Maybe get a deal with Apple or something like that. So they were keeping it alive to try to make it a reality. But if marketing isn't going to support it, and they don't believe there's an audience there, then it's not going to happen. I think at that point the budgets were such that break even was about maybe 500,000 units. Not that it cost that much for the adventure game titles, but people were focused on selling 500,000 units, aren't going to focus on selling 15,000 units. Their energy spent on the other thing. And that's just the reality of it. And I feel like that's the mode Lucas was in around 2000, because the movie was 98, right? So Phantom Menace was kind of like, okay, this is the time where we're going to be we're going to sell 1 million units of every game we make from now on, because the Star Wars, we're going to sync up with the movie. We're going to sync marketing with the movie. We're only going to greenlight products that can do those kind of numbers. We're going to sell on consoles, all these things. That was the transition the company was trying to make. And that wasn't consistent with adventure games on the Mac.
Now, speaking of Aaron Giles, he also mentioned that in 2003, LucasArts was experimenting with downloadable content, and he was tasked to compress Full Throttle down to 100 megabytes as a proof of concept. In the end, he got it down to 150, I think, but that project was scrapped. Were you part of that experiment?
Yeah, well, that was part of Sam & Max Freelance Police. So Sam & Max Freelance Police was going to be episodic content. It was going to pioneer episodic content at LucasArts. The idea was that, like we just discussed, that if you were going to go to retail, then break even was 500,000 to 1 million units. And there was no shelf space for PC games, but there was a PC market. Steam hadn't happened yet. They were cusping. They were going to come out with Half-Life. I was certainly talking to them. I was working more with Real Networks, Yahoo. We were trying to get Rogue Squadron and Full Throttle onto Real Networks. And we were working with this company called Yummy. And what they did was you would create a manifest of assets, a list of assets that were in the first room. And people would fire up the game and it would download the first room. They'd get in and play the room and then hopefully spend 4 or 5 minutes in there, because the game would start downloading while you were playing the assets for the next room. And so if there were 2 different rooms you could go to, it would need to download both. So the idea was that you were playing while the game was downloading in the background. So kind of a prototype for what would eventually become streaming on some levels. But, no one, we were trying to push it through and like, let's do it. But no one had the appetite at that point for more, because we had done so much innovation in that kind of late 90s period. Then we kind of fell on our faces with the launches of the games on the console. There wasn't really a hugely successful console game. So the idea of going out and relaunching the old adventure game franchises as downloadable content was just way too speculative for upper management, and they didn't go after it, and they cut Sam & Max Freelance Police, and those 2 games never made it. made it to the marketplace, though it would have been really interesting had they. But that's what happened there.
Like I mentioned, Full Throttle Hell on Wheels was canceled in August 2003, and 7 Max Freelance Police in March 2004. Were you aware at that point that the game is going to be canceled, or at any time during production, or did it come as a surprise to the team?
Well, it wasn't a surprise, because we had been in when Randy Breen came in from EA. He came in and was running the group of kind of the senior management, and Simon was the president. And they had instituted this thing where you would bring your project in front of a group of the group of all the executives and the directors at the company. And I think he probably brought the idea with him from EA, and pitch the status of your project. And the marketing team would come in and talk about how many units it would sell, and you'd go through everything. And then at the end, they'd go through projections of what it was going to make and everything else. So, we knew we were always on the edge, because it wasn't a no-brainer. And then the whole time I was preaching digital distribution as a valid way of distributing the games, and they were trying to deal with, well, how will it react with retail? Will it, cannibalize retail? So, there was a lot of back and forth, and I was always kind of trying to fight for it. Like, what if we did this, we did that, we can make it work, blah, 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 blah. But the development was running a little behind schedule at the same time, because we were Full Throttle and Sam & Max Freelance Police were part of LucasArts shared technology initiative. So they were building out a new rendering technology, and we were both supposed to use it. And that rendering technology just couldn't get over the hump. So both games were kind of waiting to be able to run, to be able to test theories. And I think Kevin Bruner had Mike Malikoff and Mike Monnier kind of build an engine that we could render on, that could render the game on. And then we used Lua as our scripting engine, because there was also a company scripting engine that was being worked on at the same time. And Throttle was waiting on those, and that just, they could not bring it all together. So it was supposed to all come together in Throttle and then move to us. So when that didn't happen, we were kind of behind the 8 ball. And then, I think Simon was out. I forget when Simon was left. And then Jim Ward was slowly coming in around January, February. I think he came in to meet with us before he took over as president, but we knew that was going to happen. And his tone was like, it's Star Wars is where this company's going. So get on board, and we need to maximize Star Wars. So the writing was on the wall, I think. I wasn't super shocked when it was killed. I feel like I was even working on some like other ways of getting it developed before, but I definitely was after it got killed. I spent they gave me a month to see if I could sell the rights to different digital distribution companies to see if they would take on and give us $1 million to try to finish it off or something like that. And that was it.
And how soon after 7 Max was canceled did you leave LucasArts?
Well, I left, I believe, in April of 2004. So I must have spent a month. There, and then was let go in the first round of layoffs after Jim Ward came in.
So we get to Telltale Games. Walk me through the first days of Telltale Games.
Well, I remember we would go over and meet at Kevin Bruner's house. There was probably 4 or 5 of us, and talk about what the games could be. We talked about the idea that we really wanted to do narrative games. We talked about what we liked about adventure games, and talked about what could be improved about adventure games to kind of get more of a dramatic feel, make it feel more like a playable story versus a puzzle game. And we played a lot of Infocom games, at that time. Kevin was really into Infocom, and he thought they did a great job of allowing you to come in and kind of do whatever you wanted and then get a response. So it felt like you were really actually interacting with the world, and the world was responding back to you. And I think that was kind of the key term that we always had at that point, was that, like, how do the NPCs respond to the user action? Do they do it in a way that makes sense? If Sam walks into a store and picks up the same magazine 4 times, looks at it, says, I don't want that, puts it down. I don't want that, puts it down. I don't want that, puts it down. Something in that space needs to say, we get it. You don't want that. Look for something else, because the user's telling the world, I don't know what to do right now. I'm just picking this thing up because I can, or whatever. But even if you were in the real world, if you saw a person talking to themselves, picking up a magazine in a store, and you owned the store, you would say something. So it would create the illusion of reality, of that I'm in a virtual world versus a virtual alive world versus something that's waiting for me to act on it. So, we just had a lot of conversations about that, and just started talking about building a business model and how do you create a business, and got to work writing the business model. I think we were out in April. We went to E3 that May. So it was maybe 1 month, and I had written the business model, the business plan for Telltale with Troy Mollender and Kevin Bruner, and help of some other folks, in about 3 weeks. And that was the basis for what we had, from that point forward. So yeah, it was, we hit the ground running at E3 for sure, because there was still a lot of talk about the Sam and Max game that got canceled, and the Sam and Max team, and that kind of thing. So we parlayed that a little bit, and got some good meetings. And I still remember going into Midway and talking to one of the former LucasArts guys, who's like, we've got these 2 guys that do this little show called South Park. It sounds perfect. And like, yes, it does. Yes, it does. 13 years later, we were still talking to them, trying to get a deal. But yeah.
But during your time at LucasArts, you saw the decline in popularity of the adventure game genre. So why did you believe that this genre could be saved by changing the release model to an episodic one?
Well, I think because the retail model couldn't support adventure games, didn't mean adventure games couldn't be supported. And it didn't mean there wasn't an audience for adventure games. What we saw was people that would buy content. So we calibrated everything to the fact that, okay, this is a $250,000 sales would be a good number. And if we could do that, how much can we make based on what price point, and can we fund more games? Can we build a business around it? So it was saying $250,000 people is a valid audience. There's no way to reach that audience. That audience loves adventure games. They're going to figure out, kind of like you said at the very beginning, the first puzzle is getting the game started. So if we're going to start doing digital distribution, and no one's ever done digital distribution before, the best people to do it with are the people that understand what it means to jump through a hoop or two. So that worked really well for us, because it happened the way we projected it. People would say, but adventure games are dead. If they're dead, well, why do you keep talking about them if they're dead? You just wrote, there's 5 different articles about them being dead. That means they're not dead. That means people, if they were dead, why are you writing articles about it? You don't write articles about dead people necessarily. Sometimes you do, but most things that are dead are just dead. So it was very much alive, and people didn't understand. It was all this kind of, oh my God, we'll never make it. And, in my mind, what I've always thought in my career is like, anybody can tell you a reason why something can't be done. It's the easiest thing in the world. People who can look at something and say, oh, you can't do that because of this, or you can't do that because of that, or you can't, some people get really good at telling you 15 different reasons why you can't do something, but for me, it's always like, there is a way to do it. I don't care about those. Thank you for, fine, those 15 reasons, you may be right on all of those. I won't do those, but I'm going to figure out the one way with our team. We're going to figure out the one way you can do it and make it happen. So, why we thought adventure games could come back. There were two pieces. There were multiple pieces to it, but we knew there was an existing audience that was large but couldn't be supported by any other way, and didn't have anything else to go to, and that we would be interesting. And we knew that CSI, the biggest franchise in television, was an adventure game, and that LA Law was following as an adventure game, and that Nancy Drew was having success as an adventure game. And they were succeeding because people loved those franchises, and the only way you could get the franchise experience was through the adventure story game mechanic. You couldn't turn it into a shooter. The only mechanic available to it was an adventure game, but the adventure game mechanic needed to be tweaked to be more dramatic, which was which is what we wanted to do. That was what we dreamed could be the mark that we left, was that, we could show how to make interactive stories. So that was really like that. It never changed from that. Like that, we built the whole thing on that, and pretty much stuck to it every step of the way. People be like, why would you ever get CSI and Sam and Max at the same, or Bone at the same time? That makes no sense. Well, and then Texas Hold'em makes absolutely no sense to anybody, but in our minds, it all played together. The Texas Hold'em was when you're playing poker and you put a card down, the NPCs react. So that notion that the world is watching me and the cards give me a thing that I did this, and they saw what I did and they commented on it and they fed back to me. That was part of the experience of immersing me in the world more deeply. The world cares about what I'm doing. The Bone was like, okay, let's just build out our traditional adventure game stuff. Let's get going with the adventure game folks. And then CSI was like, okay, how do you build this for the mainstream? And, I had a real interest in that, like solving a crime. I thought that was a really fun mechanic to crack. And we would go over it again and again, that like, I have a hunch. This is what we wanted to do. Was, from what I'm learning, I think it's this. Now I'm going to take this action to prove or disprove that. That was always a limitation there. We could never get that feeling right. But, everything we took away from it. I mean, CSI was pretty successful. I think it was one of their biggest selling CSI game. And Bone and Hold'em certainly taught us everything we needed to know to move on to Sam and Max.
And what was the development process on the first season of Sam and Max like? Did you first develop the story arc and then proceed to work on the script of each individual episode? Or was everything planned out in advance before you began working on any of the episodes?
I think we had an outline for all the episodes. They weren't all fleshed out to the same degree. I think there was kind of like a long view of what would happen. I don't think we made anything up like, and now this is a VR episode because we can. I think it was just the flow of what we came up with at the very beginning. I know, at least I remember developing up until I remember conversations about Lincoln and the Lincoln Monument in episode 4 before, as we were still brainstorming. So I know we were at least all the way to episode 4. So we laid everything out kind of arc wise, and then dove into the details of episode 1.
And what were the significant differences between the canceled Sam and Max sequel and that first season? Did you incorporate any ideas from the canceled game into your own game?
No, I think the one thing we learned was we were less reliant on mini games. Like the Freelance Police was really trying to do kind of like Throttle, but even more so, more like Full Throttle 2, mini games that felt like standalone playable mini games. And I think our idea was at that time, like, okay, if we don't sell Sam and Max episode 1. If we sell Sam Max episode 1 on Yahoo for whatever, we can sell the poker. We can sell one of the mini games. There was a marbles mini game that was actually kind of neat. We could pull that out and sell that as a standalone downloadable product, something like that. There was no notion of that on season 1. And none of the story beats were the same. So it was a pretty fresh product, but we had learned a ton from having worked on Freelance Police, and we did do 5 episodes worth of content at LucasArts. So we knew what we could do. We had some puzzle ideas and stuff, but most of it was Brendan, and I forget if Dave was on season 1, but Brendan Q. Ferguson coming up with the story and new voice lines, and it was fun. Steve Purcell went out with us and ate and came up with all the stories. So, yeah.
And what aspect of episodic gaming, in your opinion, most enhanced the overall enjoyment of the gaming experience of that first season?
Well, the first season, we didn't really understand exactly what we were doing, but I think we were one of the first companies to create a feedback loop between a real-time audience and game development. So we were in development while the games were coming out. So by the third episode, people were starting to say, hey, why am I seeing the same? Because we had this sitcom notion that, okay, we'll do the office, the street, and we'll add 3 or 4 different environments, and each one will create like a sitcom. But people by episode 2, the people were like, why are they the same jokes this month as they were last month? So we went and we wrote new jokes for 3 and 4, and we started kind of thinking about how to build assets differently. And, we started to say, oh, people really like this character. Let's give them a bigger role. So it was a subtle thing. It isn't really a one-to-one thing, but it's like, because it's live development, the content is more connected to the user, the youth player, the gamer, because we're in an interactive experience with them. It's kind of like, The Martian. Have you ever heard of the book The Martian? Guy that wrote it started putting chapters up online, and people that would never happen, or that, what are you talking about with this? Or what about, have you explored that? And then it'd write the next chapter incorporating all their feedback. So the final version of the book was basically written with the people that were reading the book simultaneously. Season 1 was a little bit like that, but as we moved on, as Telltale grew, that became a critical piece of us delivering really high quality content.
And how soon after completing the first season of Sam and Max did you greenlit the second one?
It didn't take long. I mean, we had a relationship with GameTap, which was the digital distribution channel for Turner. They were trying to do downloadable distribution, and they would launch our Sam and Max games at the beginning of the month. Then we'd wait 3 weeks, and then we'd launch it on Telltale's platform 3 weeks later. So they had a three-week exclusive on it, and they wanted to do another season. So for us, from a financing standpoint, having a co-production deal, we had a co-production deal with them. We had a development deal with Ubi, and we had financing from angel investors. So those 3 things really kept the company solid during all those years. So once they were like, let's do it, we were all over it. And it was great. It was good. I mean, I think episode 4 of season 2 is one of our best episodes in the whole history of Telltale. I put it up there.
And when did the negotiations for creating a new Monkey Island game with LucasArts begin?
We were pretty hopeless. Well, it was kind of they were trying to do the Star Wars games, and it was very clear they didn't want to have anything to do with the old franchises. But then once Darryl Rodriguez came in as president, he kind of opened the door up to, hey, we're going to do old things, and we're going to explore the old licenses. So we called him up pretty quickly right after he came on board and started talking about, okay, what would it take to do Monkey? And that happened pretty fast.
And following the success of Tales, you mentioned in an interview that you were exploring the possibility of creating more games with LucasArts, like an episodic sequel to Day of the Tentacle. What can you tell us about that project?
I don't think that one ever made it very far. That might have been one of those interviews I was doing where it's like, maybe I should let them know we want Day of the Tentacle. I think that would have been the most fun for us to work on. But I don't think we ever got too far on it. I mean, having Dave on staff at the time, would have made it more possible, I think, than not. But LucasArts, they were, I don't know where they were at. When did they sell to Disney? When did all that happen? Didn't they?
2012.
2012.
So it was
okay.
After that.
So there still were some years in there in which we could have made it work. I don't know. I mean, I got to think Walking Dead must have popped somewhere in there, and I guess Back to the Future and JP, and we just got too busy we stopped worrying. We were hustling for licenses so much in the first 5 years or 6 years. And then we had enough success that now we had enough licenses to work on. And we kind of had more licenses than development capacity for a couple years there. Well, probably for the rest of the history of the company at that point. But I think DOT would have been nice, but we were looking at some of the other franchises is more important at the time.
Now, amidst the seemingly relentless pursuit of acquiring numerous licensed IPs, like you said, you also greenlit smaller projects like Puzzle Agent. How did that happen?
Well, Graham Annable was our first creative director, and he had went off to direct films, Box Trolls, and but we still loved the work he had done with Grickle, and he had an idea, and he came to us. And I think it was part of us noticing that the digital distribution market, there was the Steam digital distribution of PC games market, but the phone was for real, and there were lots of phone games, and that some content that could be made to play on iPads and phones would be a good thing, and Puzzle Agent made sense. So it was a way to explore that. We did that, and we were doing the poker games as well, which were smaller, but it was a good way for us to take small groups of people that weren't attached to projects and have them execute things. I think Puzzle Agent really exceeded our expectations as far as what it did, and I think it really brought kind of Sean and Jake together as a team. And kind of got their storytelling chops against that, and they created Jake's a genius at creating a mood with a game and a gameplay experience. Really pays a lot of attention to that, and of course Sean's writing was wonderful in it too. So, I think there was kind of this skunk group that was working on different things that were like, okay, Monkey's pushing us closer to traditional adventure game. And we still want to branch out into this interactive narrative space. So what are ways that we can kind of push on that and experience different ways of doing it that aren't traditional adventure game? And that was our way of doing it through that time.
Around the same time, there were also talks of Telltale doing a King's Quest episodic game and a Guerrillas adventure game and a bunch of other cool adventure games. And how did you decide at the time which projects you'd greenlight and which you'd ignore?
It had gotten to, well, the guiding light for everything was still, have we found the formula yet for interactive, for a compelling, dramatic, interactive adventure game / narrative story? And I don't think we thought we had got there. So it was, what franchises would get us there? And in a lot of our research, we were looking into zombies as something that would be, in our prototypes, you could create a sense of urgency. So the idea was, I need to make a decision now. If I don't decide whether I'm going to, cut these wires that's going to lock these doors or run out the back, then the zombies are going to come in and that's going to be it. Like that was like, okay, that's the type of, we want the player to be like, what do I do? I'm here now, shoot. If I don't do this, I'm in trouble. So we were doing a thing called the zombie prototype. And then we started we had been talking to Universal for years, and it was like, well, what if you replace zombies with dinosaurs? And that's why we moved to JP, because it was kind of in that direction of, okay, how do we create a sense of urgency around decision making that will get us to this, sense of narrative. And Back to the Future came with it, and we did Back to the Future in kind of a traditional style, but they were really good. Back to the Future gave us the idea of memory and consequence. She asked, what's your name? You say, oh, I'm Steve Austin, or I'm Steve this. And then later in the game, they come back and say, oh, it's Steve Austin. Simple thing, but everybody that played it was like, oh my God, the game remembered my choice. Mm-hmm. And then with JP, Kevin was pretty radical. He said, we're not going to even have any walking. We're just going to it's just going to be camera cuts, the whole thing. And that blew people's minds. And that gave JP a pretty kind of a negative vibe around it, but it was a really cool experiment. And we were able to create a lot of tension and drama using cinematic style. And I think by this 4th episode of JP, we were pretty dialed in. And when you play it on an iPad, you can really get a feel for, okay, this is not your typical game. This is an interactive movie, and probably the closest thing we got. So those 2 games kind of bled into Walking Dead. We made the bet on Walking Dead, I think just because it had so much positive energy behind it, and we knew it had the AMC show, and it was like, okay, let's get something fresh. We've been 20 years in the past for a long time. Even, Monkey, Sam & Max, Back to the Future, JP, everything was from the past. And this was something that was going to hit. This was new and fresh. We were going to hit with it when it launched. And we saw their trailer and said, okay, we can sync up with this. And that's why we kind of pointed all the guns at that.
While producing The Walking Dead, were you aware at the time that you had a hit on your hands? Because JP itself wasn't that well received due to these things exactly being an interactive movie and being in situations where you don't have that much choice. While in The Walking Dead, you used the same mechanic, the same game mechanics, and it was a hit. So,
well, we brought The Walking back. Like we felt like maybe we went a little too far by not allowing people to kind of walk. So we brought some traditional adventure game stuff back. I think we knew we had made something special. Everybody that played it all the time was blown away by it, in little bits. And it took us, we did it in little chunks to get it to feel right. But I remember the moment. So Dead Island had come out, right? Remember Dead Island had come out? Mm-hmm. And they did that trailer where you were like, oh my God, this is crazy, zombies. And then the game was kind of just a straightforward shooter. But we knew they were onto something because people were so into that kind of environment. And then we did the trailer where the message plays on the machine about Clementine, I don't know where you are. Multiple messages play back and forth, and you just played that. And when that ended, you would, personally, I'd be like, every person that felt that piece of content could feel it emotionally. So it gave the project a basis of like what's possible. And we ended up in episode 1, we probably hit 7 or 8 moments like that, at least. And we knew when we were hitting them, and then we'd amp them up, and then we'd let people play it, and people would just be blown away. And I think we did a play test. We were really worried. We did a play test, and we scored like 50 people. Everything was over a 9. It was either a 9 or a 10, and maybe 1 or 2 like 4s or 3s. And people would, and we'd have people come in and play it, and they just give us so much feedback. And the way they talked about the game was, I felt like this when I said this to Doug, I was mad at him, or I was so mad at Carly at this point. I couldn't believe she had done that to me. So I told her this. And, we knew at that point that it was special. It was how would people respond? And then everybody, the same reasons that we dug it, the same reasons that people, if some people like something, there's something there, and the market responded, and then the show took off at the same time. And, I think they helped each other. I really do. I think that the buzz around Walking Dead was amplified with the game. I mean, it was going to be huge anyway, but I think we helped make it a popular culture on a lot of fronts, So yeah, it was a rare time in life when you hit something,
When you started Telltale, you decided that rather than focusing on puzzle designs like older adventure games, you wanted to focus on branching narratives and the episodic format. Did you feel that with The Walking Dead, you finally achieved a game design in which the core mechanic was nothing but narrative?
Well, it was a balance, right? Because it had also introduced, and that's the other thing that came from JP, it had also introduced quick times. So it was basically puzzles. It was a choice and consequence, which I think was the newest thing. I mean, we had looked at other games that we wanted to model after, and we're trying to do things similar to them. But we pushed that, and then the traditional adventure game stuff, and then the quick times, the three kind of all blended together with pacing and cinematic style. And then the choice, and then the kind of the around the game experience, the episodic level of it, of people talking about their choices, and the water cooler effect. And, by the time we were developing episode 5, there was so much anticipation, and we were developing inside that energy of anticipation, where it was hard because there was pressure, right? Like, you got to nail it. But at the same time, there was just so much feedback and so much buzz and so much energy around it that it all just went right back into everybody's work into that episode, which episode 5 is a great episode. I mean, they're all good. In season 1, they're all really good. But 5 was a great episode. A lot of emotion. So, yeah, it was, I think it was the culmination of stuff we've been working for a long time, working really well in sync.
From that point on, you tried to secure even more licensed IPs with Batman, Game of Thrones, The Wolf Among Us, which was based on the Fables comic book series, among others. During your work on these titles, were you ever asked specifically by the license owners to replicate the exact formula of The Walking Dead, or were given creative freedom in terms of gameplay?
I think the expectation was that it would be like The Walking Dead, but people never really understood what we did. They were just like, do what you did with them. But there was no one that could direct us towards it, because we were the only ones that could make it. It wasn't like Warner Brothers had people inside that were like, we're going to review this and see if it's enough like Walking Dead. They were more like, and the fact that Fables came out and did so well, and it was similar but different, was kind of gave us another level of credibility. And it always was about the same thing. It was, does the person who owns the story, does the creative person who's responsible for the creative consistency of this franchise, are we not saying anything? Are we making sure we don't do anything with the characters that they would never do, that's completely off base? That, and they like, and the fact that we worked with those people and we told them our storytelling goals, and then we had told them we wanted our storytelling goals were based on what they wanted. We valued anything we could get from them. because we wanted to make it as real of a franchise experience as possible. And that relationship was great because historically their experience with games was like the game company didn't want anything to do with them because the story stuff just got in the way of the level design. You know, like Spider-Man, like would Stan Lee ever do something where Spidey goes through and beats up every single criminal in town? Well, I mean, maybe by the Spidey universe, maybe, but you know, he would never make something where it was just like Spider-Man was just running around beating people up, right? That wouldn't be the way he would tell the story. That wouldn't be what Spider-Man did. But from a game perspective, that totally makes sense. That's what you do in a game. You run around and you beat up the bad guys. So we had an avenue to talk to people inside the franchise that they really understood and really appreciated, which was what's the character motivation? How did this situation arise? What would this character do in this situation? Like those types of conversations, the people the writers in Hollywood, the creators in Hollywood were super interested in having, and it's their specialty. Their specialty isn't like how many power-ups should I put in the city level or in the cellar level or whatever. You know, their specialty is story, and so we were giving them an avenue to express themselves interactively in that direction.
And then came September 21st, 2018, in which 90% of Telltale's workforce was let go. What went wrong, in your opinion?
Well, you know, obviously that was a bad thing, shitty thing that had to happen, that did happen. You know, there were a lot of details that I can't really talk about, that were just kind of misplays by the organization. But you know, I think one thing is it was the company had gotten so large, and the amount of revenue it was generating against the cost that it had was unsustainable. And the ability to respond was difficult because there was, you know, when you're in that kind of death spiral or whatever, there's just a lot of chaos, and it's really hard to figure out what's going on. You know, I think on a personal level, I think Kevin and I started something with kind of a shared vision of what it could be. And we kind of got there with Walking Dead, and post that, we didn't have kind of a guiding light anymore for our decisions, you know. And we'd been working together since 98. So, you know, in any relationship, that's a long time. And you get to a point where everything you agree with someone about has already been acted upon, right? You agreed on it, you did it, maybe hopefully you succeeded, and it's in place and it's there. All that's left is what you don't see eye to eye on. And that's there every single day. So, you know, from my perspective, I think there was an expectation that Kevin and myself were kind of interchangeable. And the fact is, it took both of us everything we had to stay on track for as long as we did. And that doesn't mean that the employees and the talented employees that were able to engage and everyone that worked at Telltale wasn't part of making Telltale great, because for sure they were. We never could have done it without the brilliant people that worked with us. But as the leadership, you know, we were two parts, you know, and it was like you can't like take the tires off the car and expect it to still run. And I think the people thought that was what was going to happen. Like if when I left in 15 or 16 and Kevin took over, it wasn't like now Kevin's going to do it, because we were together the whole time, and now we weren't together anymore. And that was the important thing, for that leadership to really work. And it would have been the same thing had it gone the other direction. If Kevin had left and I left behind, we were a two people thing. So I think that was a dramatic thing that happened that didn't get the respect that it should have had to kind of deal with it. And I take my own responsibility for it, because I left. My son had been diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, and my wife was going through some health stuff too. And it's just been so much conflict, and we were at a point of so much conflict after so much success, that it wasn't really possible for us to keep going as a team, and replacing Kevin and me with just Kevin needed more support than what it got, or we should have considered it more, but we just kept plowing forward. Like, we never slowed down. We never, in 13 or 15 years or whatever it was, 13 years, we never took our foot off the gas. And we should have realized that it's a change. It's dramatic. And instead we grew. So that's just my personal sense. But we grew at a time where we should have been rethinking how to move forward, if you want to point at one moment. But there was a ton of stuff that happened through the years, and we had a good run, but sadly it didn't end well.
And what actions did you take following the closure of the company, and when did the idea to start a new gaming company come to mind?
Well, I spent a lot after I left Telltale. I've been spending a lot of time trying to create a charity. I work with the Juvenile Diabetes Research Foundation, trying to help them relate to the game industry, and work with the game industry to raise money, and to create community, and to just really understand what how to introduce yourself to people online in a digital space, with all the things that charity and games kind of go together now. It's charity streams and Humble Bundle, and events on Fortnite. So there's an opportunity there. So I'm trying to guide them into understanding, how to create a presence there, because there's a lot of people affected by type 1 diabetes in the game industry. And when my son was diagnosed, I told some people about it, and I learned of some people in the studio that were like, "Oh, I have type 1 diabetes." I said, "How have you been?" And knowing what my son goes through on a daily basis, having a disease that affects him, that needs management every single day, I couldn't believe that this person had been next to me for 3 years, and I had no idea they went through the same thing. And it was just like, I can't even imagine how did you do it? I wish I was there to help you more. I wish I knew, so that was a lot of my motivation for it, was like, okay, if people are around and they're dealing with this thing that's difficult to deal with, and they're not saying anything about it, then we need to create a place where they can, where we can all come together and talk about it. So that's been going good. And Telltale shut down, and I'd heard that Sam & Max was, the Sam & Max license was available, and I called Jake Rodkin on the phone and said, "Jake, you want to do the Sam & Max stuff?" And he said, "Yeah, let's do it." And we got the assets, and Jake and Randy Tudor and John Scrow joined us from early Telltale guys, and we've been remastering the games as we discussed earlier, and it's been great. Everything's gone over well. We're working on season 3 now, and hopefully we'll have that out pretty soon. And it's we'll have to figure out what to do next after that. But the Sam & Max stuff is been a good ride, and it's been fun to revisit it, and it's been doing well for us.
Do you plan to work on more remasters, or original IPs, or licensed IPs?
I think we're still trying to figure it out. It's right now, we got the Sam & Max stuff in front of us. And the good news is, we've been working with the Telltale license, and we have the Telltale tool, and we have a nice kind of platform. So it would be good to be able to do something in that.
Before we conclude our conversation, I have a few questions from our viewers. Anna from Classic Gamers Guild podcast asks, given your pioneering work in episodic game production and interactive narrative, how do you see the future of storytelling in video games evolving? And are there any emerging trends or technologies that you believe will have a significant impact on how narratives are delivered to players?
Well, I'm pretty excited about it because it seems like there's starting to be a few more breakthroughs coming through. Like it seems like there's a little bit of a renaissance in games. Kind of post Telltale games are starting to come out. A lot of the people that kind of spread out into the gaming world are out there doing different projects. So I'm excited to see the work as it comes out. And Expanse came out from Telltale, and the Star Trek game came out from Kevin and his team. I think a lot of people still realize it's a viable business. The trend that interests me a lot is kind of integrating with streamers and kind of the Twitch gameplay experience and just that idea of playing games together in groups where you can build games that could be that a creator can play for his audience or her audience, and they can do it together, and it has a lot of hooks and bells and whistles in there, and things grow. I think AI, we were always hopeful on AI, either from a procedural narrative standpoint or from kind of NPCs with AI that you can give you more freedom in the world. That idea that I can do whatever I want, and that there's a response there for me. I think AI enables that more than human interaction does. We played the Infocom games early on because you could say whatever you want or do whatever you want, and a text response was always a lot less expensive than building out a narrative response. So if you can put I'm not saying AI should generate the characters, but I'm thinking the characters could have some level of AI that could say, I'm reading the room. Sam has picked up that magazine now 4 times and put it back down. As the AI, I'm going to step in and give a hint, give a helping clue, or I'm going to make an observation. And the writer doesn't have to do that, but the brains of the NPCs in the room are watching and saying, okay, I'm going to feed the player something right now, no matter what. Maybe they push the water cooler over and it makes a big mess, and the player has to jump out of the way. But at least it's the world is alive and it's not waiting for me to respond. And I think that there's an opportunity there. If you don't, get caught up in like mega AI and are just like, okay, simple level AI. We used to use the term AI for the hint system a lot. So I'm hopeful that people can figure stuff out there. That's a couple things.
Sigma Gamma asks, Netflix has already shown interest in games with Netflix games and narrative-driven interactive content. Do you think that getting adventure games or interactive content with adventure game elements as part of the content offered by streaming networks on TV is feasible? And what are the challenges in making it happen?
Well, I think, I think it's feasible. I would love to. Yes. This comes back to there's probably 99,000 reasons why someone will tell you can't do it, but there's definitely a way to do it. It's picking the right piece of content. It's creating the right experience. It's getting the right partnership. Like a lot of what you need an evangelist, right? When we chose Sam and Max, or even Bone, but when Telltale decided they were going to be the ones that created episodic content, we were able to say, okay, this is how it's going to work. You're going to get one this much this week, and then this month, and then next month it's going to be this, and then these things are going to happen. And the person, the audience that you're targeting needs to have an expectation set for them before they start the experience. You can't go out and just build a bunch of stuff and then put it out there and see if anyone responds when it's something brand new, because they're going to look at it and say, I don't understand this. So there's so much work that goes into queuing up the moment where it resonates, where it connects. And if you don't think about that work, you're going to fail, and that failure is going to lead to more failure because everyone's going to say it fails. So that's, in that case, it needs the evangelist with the power and the access and the ability to create the platform that makes sense, whether it's Netflix or whatever else.
And one last question from me. What are your plans for the near future?
Well, finish off Samba Max season 3. Keep working with JDRF and try to fund a cure for diabetes. And then I don't know. I'm definitely interested in putting efforts towards things that are helpful, in the world. So I don't know if I can figure out. I do have an idea that I think would be worth putting energy into. I just have to get a sanity check on it. But aside from that, as Skunk Ape, we're trying to figure out what makes sense too. And it'd be cool to keep getting more product out there for people, because some of the Telltale stuff has come down off the platforms, and that's not a good thing.
I hope you remaster Back to the Future as well. Maybe remaster Puzzle Agent. Maybe do Puzzle Agent 3.
Yeah, Graham, that Sean's so critical, but and he's busy. But those are viable things. I'm working on a document right now, things we could do next. So I'll take that into account. But you'll have to count on you to buy a unit.
I will. I promise. Well, thank you so much, Dan, for taking the time to join me for this conversation today. It's been super fun.
Likewise. Thank you, Daniel, for having me, and happy to do it. And I hope you're getting a lot of stuff from folks, from a lot of history retained here. So that's good.